The uber rich are only getting richer. The Wall Street Journal's analysis, they do it every year, shows that America's CEO salaries have set yet another record. At the top of the list, the head of Axon Enterprise, a company that makes Taser stun guns. He was paid, are you ready, $165 million last year. But a new CNN poll finds that Americans on the whole are far less optimistic about their own ability to get ahead. Only 54% now believe that the American dream is achievable through hard work. The lowest that number has been in CNN polling since at least the 90s. Joining me here is Evan Osnos, staff writer at The New Yorker and author of The Haves and Have-Yachts, Dispatches on the Ultra-Rich. This, Evan, is a very clever book title, I have to say that. You actually traveled to Viareggio. It's a little town in Tuscany. They build, what, a fifth of the world's super yachts. How's business? And is it that we're now in a Vanderbilt and Rockefeller era?
Business is booming in the super yacht world. I mean, I think it's easy for a lot of regular folks not to know it. You know, we don't come in contact with it all that much. But there has really never been a better time over the last few years to be building these giant boats. Let's remind ourselves, we're talking about pleasure boats that are the length of a football field. In some cases, they cost more than $500 million. These are the most expensive machines.
$500 million?
Yeah, literally. I mean, we've never actually built things that are more expensive than that, more than works of art, more than houses. Look, in some ways, we're now living in a new Gilded Age, Chris. This is even more than the Gilded Age, and I'm not making an abstract point. Today, America's wealthiest people have a larger share of the nation's overall wealth than the Vanderbilts and the Carnegies did at the heyday of their power a century ago.
Well, the consolidation of wealth has also led to the consolidation of political power, right? Give us a sense of how much power billionaires have right now and have been able to consolidate, and how much of that is related to having a billionaire in the White House.
Yeah, it's been an amazing thing to watch. We sort of know this in the abstract around us, but the numbers are astonishing. In 2004, billionaires contributed a total of $13 million to the presidential race. At the time, it seemed like a lot. In the 2024 election, 20 years later, they contributed 200 times as much. That was the top 100 or so families in this country. So we have gone through the roof. Part of that was the Citizens United decision, but it's also the fact that there is simply so much more money out there. Between Donald Trump's first inauguration and his second inauguration, there was tax cuts along the way. The net worth of America's billionaires more than doubled. And he has surrounded himself. He has celebrated that culture. You see it. He named 13 billionaires to the top ranks of his administration. And in many ways, he is practicing a kind of, I guess you'd call it an open marriage between politics and profit.
Well, when you start looking at that and you start looking at the number of billionaires, for example, in this administration, many of whom gave a lot of money to Donald Trump's campaign, to his inauguration, joining the club that he's starting in Washington, D.C., or his son is starting in Washington, D.C. It's the amount of money sounds incredible, for example, to join a club. But for them, they can't spend as fast as they're making money. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, look, Warren Buffett has talked about this fact in his life. He's somebody who gives a lot of money away. He has described his own fortune as an almost incomprehensible sum. He's given away $60 billion, but by the fact that he has so much of it, it continues to grow by a kind of arithmetic momentum. He's just a successful investor, and when you have that much, as he will be the first to tell you, it compounds. He still has $160 billion left. Look, I think that this is also a presidency which has decided to be quite open about the way that money affects policy. Even, we talked a moment ago about the Gilded Age and the Vanderbilts and the Carnegies. None of them had an office like Elon Musk in the White House complex. None of them were given a government department with which they could fire tens of thousands of workers. I mean, this is a level of control for the world's richest man in our politics that we've never seen. And I think in many ways, Musk's exit from politics under tremendous public pressure is a sign that it tripped a wire in our collective American national sense of what's okay. I think people just said this doesn't feel right to us.
Does it look like that this divide is going to have a political impact? And we know, for example, during the Gilded Age, the result of that was a progressive era, right? Or are these numbers just so big, people can't even wrap their heads around them?
I think we are at a fork in the road. I think we are at a point now where if we do business as usual, if we look around and turn our heads back in 30, 40 years, we're going to say, how is it that a tiny group of Americans ended up with such a large portion of our national assets? But there is another path. We've been down this road. The good news is we know the history. We know how to do this. It took Teddy Roosevelt and ultimately Franklin Roosevelt to say, look, if we want to protect American democracy, we want to protect capitalism, that means figuring out a way to make sure that the gains, the winnings, are distributed a little bit more fairly.
When we talk about someone who is working day in and day out to try to feed their family, and the person at the top making literally thousands of times more money, someone who makes more in a week or a month than some people will make in their entire lives, is that what ultimately fuels it?
It really does. I remember a conversation reporting in West Virginia when I was talking to a coal miner a few years ago. And he said to me he'd heard that his CEO of his company was making 400 or 500 times what a frontline coal miner was making. And he said, honestly, do you know anybody, any man who is really worth 400 or 500 times another man? I think there is a way in which this idea is just viscerally It offends people. And we've been down this road in our history. We've had moments when the gap in inequality has grown and moments when it shrunk. At the high point of the 20th century, our inequality was actually narrow. And there are steps we can take. It's not hard. It's about taxes and wages, and we can get there.
And it's outlined in the Haves and Have-Yachts, dispatches on the ultra-rich. Evan Osnos, thank you.
My pleasure.
Good talking to you.